We're going to get started. It's my understanding Mr. Rush is on his way. So good afternoon, everybody. So I call this meeting of the Subcommittee on Energy to mark up H.R. 6511, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Reform Act. The bill authorizes the Department of Energy to conduct a pilot program to lease spare capacity at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which will become available in greater amounts under current legislatively mandated drawdowns of the reserve. You'll remember that Congress authorized the creation of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve 40 years ago in response to the Arab oil embargo to mitigate threats of energy supply disruptions. And at the time, our domestic production was in decline and we were becoming more and more reliant on imports, increasing our vulnerability to supply disruptions and associated price spikes. Today, the U.S. is the world's #1 producer of oil and gas, and our imports have declined by about 70% since peaking in 2005. And our domestic production capacity continues to surge, raising important questions about the role of the reserve going forward. So as we heard in testimony on the legislative hearing for the bill in July, even with America's energy abundance, the SPRO remains a critical energy security asset. It continues to serve as an important tool for protecting our long-term economic interests and to meet our obligations to our energy allies around the globe. And because Congress has mandated DOE to draw down and sell approximately 300 million barrels of crude oil over the next decade, you'll recall 21st Century Cures was one of the reasons, we must confront what to do with the spare capacity that will become available. The bill provides a sensible, innovative solution. It authorizes DOE to conduct a pilot program to make necessary upgrades and lease up to 200 million barrels of the underutilized capacity that will become available with the drawdowns. The bill amends Section 168 of the Energy Policy and Conservation Act to allow the Secretary to lease underutilized capacity to the private sector as well as foreign governments. It ensures that costs for upgrades will be covered in lease revenue, and it includes protections to ensure that any lease to a foreign country will not impair national security and that any lease will not impair the strategic reserve operations. So using excess storage capacity through a leasing program is certainly an innovative idea. It should be a win-win for the federal government. At a minimum, DOE may be able to offset some of its maintenance costs and invest in new infrastructure that will ensure the long-term operations of the SPRO. Let me acknowledge and thank especially Committee Vice Chair Barton, Subcommittee Ranking Member Rush for partnering on the bill. Their effort here represents an important step to modernizing DOE's I knew that would get you here. DOE's long-term energy security mission. It's an important bipartisan measure, and I would urge all of my colleagues to support it, and will recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Rush, for an opening statement.
That's Bush, Mr.
It's that tie of yours.
Mr. Chairman. That's Bush. All right, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing today, markup rather, examining legislation to authorize a pilot project to commercialize the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPRO. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know, I can't say enough about my friend Joe Martin, my colleague, and I want to sort of thank him and his staff for working with my office on this important piece of bipartisan legislation. Chairman, I just want to also say that Joe Martin and I come from different sides of the country, so to speak, but we have over the years developed a wonderful working relationship and a friendship, and it just really gives me quite pleasure just to be able to work with him on this legislation. This is my partisan piece of legislation, and it may be a precursor for other kind of bipartisan initiatives that we may be able to work together on in the future. I want to commend the staff, Mr. Chairman, from the minority and the majority side for working together on this bill, which should help inform our decisions regarding the best use of the small moving forward. The energy portfolio of the nation has undergone a dramatic change since the small was first established to counter the oil shortages of the 70s. In fact, as the U.S. has transformed from a heavy importer of foreign oil to a global leader in oil export, the small is now used more as a piggy bank to fund a vast majority of unrelated congressional initiatives, rather than its purpose initially as an emergency energy backstop. Mr. Chairman, this bill would not only help to repurpose the small, but it would also actually bring in extra needed revenues by leasing storage space to friendly foreign allies and to private corporations. This funding could then be used to help pay for infrastructure upgrades to modernize these facilities and maximize the American taxpayers' return on this investment. Mr. Chairman, I again want to thank you for holding this markup today, and I want to just say that I look forward to working with you and working with my friend Joe Martin and the majority side to move this bill expeditiously through the committee to the floor and ultimately to the president to be signing the law. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. I would note that we have a bill on the House floor that a number of members are helping to manage. So with that, I know the gentleman from Texas wants to be recognized for 1 minute for an opening statement. Mr. Barton?
1 minute or 3 minutes?
Let you.
How about we compromise on 2, Mr. Chairman?
Unanimous consent, the gentleman has 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. I'll try to take every second of it. First, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Rush for scheduling this markup. I want to thank Congressman Rush for being the Democrat sponsor of the bill. It's a good thing that I didn't know him when I was younger. I probably would have been recruited and been the only white Panther member of the Black Panther Party had I known him in my younger days. But we make a good team. This is a good bill. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was created when we were importing around 10 to 11 million barrels of oil a day. It's in the aftermath of the Arab oil embargo. It's authorized up to 1 billion barrels of storage. We actually have constructed about 700 million barrels. We had several days in August where we actually exported more crude oil, Mr. Chairman, than we imported. That's pretty amazing. The consequence is, with our increase in oil production, we now don't really need 1 billion barrels of oil capacity in our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So the question is, what do you do with it? And the answer in this bill is we open up the vacant space, the unused capacity, for lease to the private sector. It's not mandatory. We don't force them to use it. It's on a voluntary basis. And I can report to the subcommittee, Mr. Chairman, that in my visits with some of the oil industry leadership in Texas during the August break, they're very intrigued with the idea. Above ground storage to build, tank storage, cost about 50 cents a barrel. And we're fairly certain that if we lease the SPR that's already available, it'll be much less than that. So it's truly a win-win, win for the American taxpayer and a win for the American consumer. So with that, I appreciate you marking the bill up today, and I hope it passes unanimously.
Gentleman yields back. Other members wishing to give an opening statement? Gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm in favor of this bipartisan and proposal is being offered by Mr. Barton and Mr. Rush. The SPR should be modernized given all the changes that are taking place that impact it. I'm especially in favor of proposals for allies to use this as an option to meet their international obligations. Repeated drawdowns, however, will have an effect on the salt caverns and we must be mindful of the degradation that may occur. This is a sound legislative proposal addressing these issues. We should also be discussing whether regional product reserves such as gasoline should be a part of the conversation. Whether it's in the Northeast, the Midwest, or the West Coast, there are natural disasters or other occasions where these reserves could support resiliency efforts. I recognize that this has a cost and we should work on a bipartisan basis to accomplish this, and I welcome any bipartisan cooperation that may be available. With that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The other members wishing to offer an opening statement? Seeing none, the chair would call up H.R. 6511 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 6511, to authorize the Secretary of Energy to carry out a program to lease underutilized strategic petroleum reserve facilities and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point, so ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Seeing none, are there any other amendments? It's good news. The question now occurs on forwarding the bill, H.R. 6511, to the full committee. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. And without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved by the subcommittee, so ordered, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
The only thing I would show you is I climbed the sleeping bear.
Oh, you did? You got to make sure you don't slip down there, right?
Oh my God.